Have you ever wondered what might happen if the road, which seems so familiar and ordinary, became the setting for something inexplicable? Have you ever imagined that a simple stop at a cheap motel could change your life forever? We're not talking about a luxury hotel or some famous tourist destination. We're talking about a roadside motel, one of those places you pass by and barely notice, but which, for some people, becomes the turning point of something terrifying. I was exhausted. You know, that tiredness that seems to go beyond the physical. I'd spent the entire day in meetings, rushing to one appointment after another, and the last thing I wanted was another hour on the road. Route 66, which seemed like a simple transit point on my journey, was actually taking me to something I never imagined. Have you ever thought about how many people pass through there, unaware of the secrets this road holds? How many travelers stay in cheap motels along this route, simply seeking rest? I, for example, was looking for a simple place to rest before continuing on my way, unaware of what awaited me that night. And it was in this simple, cheap, and charmless motel in the middle of nowhere that everything began to change. The receptionist handed me the keys without further ado, with that weary look that seemed to hide something more. I entered the room, and at first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A simple bed, dim lighting, the worn carpet, but for some reason, the place gave me a strange feeling, as if something was off. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just fatigue, but what happened next, in that bathroom, was what really made me question everything. Looking in the mirror, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but when I entered the bathroom, it was as if something was hiding there, something I wasn't prepared to encounter. I don't know if it was exhaustion, being alone, or simply a hunch, but when I found that wet note, mysteriously left near the sink, I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. What was written on that paper? "They are watching you. Do not enter room 5. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I stood there, the note in my hands, trying to understand what it meant. Who was watching me? And why room 5? This didn't seem like just a random note from some irritated guest. Something much stranger was going on there, and my curiosity drew me to investigate further. I needed to understand the mystery behind it, but what I discovered next was something I never imagined could happen in such a simple place. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. With each step I took in my investigation, the answers became increasingly distorted, and what seemed like a normal motel turned into something much darker. Room 5, the evasive receptionist, the mysterious note. I never imagined I was about to delve into a story that no one else, perhaps, has ever told. Now, before I continue, I ask you a question. Would you have the courage to investigate further? If you were in my shoes, would you follow the trail to the end, even knowing what was waiting for you? Let's find out together what happened in that motel, because what I experienced there and what I found later could be something much bigger than you imagine. That feeling of being watched consumed me. With every step I took down that hallway, the weight of the invisible presence grew stronger, as if the entire motel was watching me, as if they already knew my curiosity and were testing me. I knew I couldn't turn back, but at the same time, I felt the fear grow with every new movement I made. That's when I decided to investigate room 5 further. My heart was racing. Every fiber of my being was telling me to get out of there, but I was already committed. Something inside me told me that this night, or this journey, would not be like the others. I needed to understand what was happening. As I walked down the hallway, the thought of other people who had probably passed by there, feeling the same fear, the same anxiety, made me think about how powerful human curiosity is. And you who have been with me so far, have you ever felt that same fear? Or have you ever been somewhere like this, where discomfort seemed to take over, but something kept pulling you forward? If so, leave a comment below with your thoughts on what you think is happening, or perhaps what you would do in my shoes. What do you think will happen when I open that door? Your opinion and experience are crucial to this exchange, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, if you're enjoying this journey and want more stories like this, please like the video to show me you're following and that you care about the content. This helps a lot, as each like allows more people to discover this channel and join our community. Here, we always strive to share these mysterious stories, and your participation is what makes the channel grow and reach even more people with this type of content. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? By subscribing, you'll be able to follow everything that's coming without missing any intriguing stories like this one. Stay tuned for upcoming videos which promise more mysteries and revelations. Let's join us on this journey to uncover the secrets hidden in plain sight. Now, stay with me, because what I found next in room 5 will leave you even more perplexed. The motel, at first glance, seemed harmless. In fact, it even seemed welcoming in a way. But I knew this break would be different. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to enter a place where the rules of reality, at least for me, would begin to distort. The creaking doors, the empty hallways, and the receptionist's weary look seemed more a reflection of my own exhaustion than anything else. Deep down, I didn't want to think about it too much. The trip was consuming me, and I just wanted a place where I could close my eyes for a few hours. But as I walked down that hallway, something told me the tranquility was just a facade. Something in the air was off. When I entered the room, everything seemed normal. A simple bed, an old television, a stained carpet. It wasn't luxurious, but it was enough for me to relax. The dim light, the drawn curtains, everything seemed peaceful, or rather, it seemed. But there was something strange about that night, something I couldn't quite place. As I sat up in bed, I felt the room was permeated with a dense silence, something almost palpable. I was too tired to think about it, so I let it go. It wasn't until I entered the bathroom that I began to realize there was something more there, something that didn't quite fit. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection seemed to be staring back at me. But it was in the bathroom where things started to get really disconcerting. The steam on the mirror wasn't just steam. It was as if it had been left there by someone who had left in a hurry. Strange, right? As if someone had just taken a shower, but there was no one there but me. Except what really made me pause for a moment was the note. Yes, a note, left on the sink. It was partially wet, and I could see that the letters were a little smudged, as if they had been written quickly and in a hurry. "They're watching you. Don't go into room 5. Those words hit me in a way I couldn't even explain. My body tensed, and a chill ran down my spine. For a moment, I thought it was some prank from a previous guest, but something told me it was more than that. The seemingly harmless motel was hiding something from me, and room 5, well, room 5 seemed to have some kind of connection to all of this. I knew I should ignore it, move on, and sleep. But who can do that when the mystery begins to unfold before your eyes? I knew I couldn't just go back to bed and pretend nothing was happening. I wasn't that kind of person, never had been. Curiosity always guided me, and that night, something inside me decided to move forward. I needed to know what was happening there. The fear was growing, yes, but the need to find out more was greater. I took a step back and looked at the note one last time, trying to decipher more of what it seemed to tell me. I didn't know who they were, nor why room 5 had been specifically mentioned, but something told me it wasn't random. I grabbed the key, which was still on the table, and went to reception. The receptionist, who until that moment had seemed disinterested, looked at me differently. Her eyes narrowed when I asked about room 5. She hesitated for a moment, then tried to look away. It was as if she knew exactly what I was talking about, but didn't want to say it. This made me even more uneasy, and the feeling that something much bigger was going on here began to grow. I asked once again about room 5. She then replied in a low, almost whispering tone, "Nothing major. It's just an old room. Don't worry about it, you're just here to rest." Those words made no sense. She was clearly trying to get me away from something, but I wasn't going to give up so easily. I knew something was wrong there. I needed to investigate. I needed to understand why that note was there, and what was really happening in that simple roadside motel. Let's explore what happened when I finally decided to follow my instincts and investigate what was hidden. What I discovered that night will make you question even the simplest and seemingly harmless stops along the way. Who really hides such dark secrets in a motel? I'll tell you everything that happened, and I guarantee that what you hear will fill your mind with questions about what really happens when we're alone, in places we think are just stops along the way. Now, if you've ever felt that shiver down your spine, if you've ever had that feeling that something was wrong in a place where you should have been safe, comment below. That makes sense to me. Let's go on this journey together, because the answers to the mysteries I found that night will surprise you even more. The motel was in Kingman, Arizona, a town many pass through without even noticing. But for me, that night, it was more than just a rest stop on the long journey along Route 66. The place seemed simple, almost rustic, with an air of decades past, as if time had stood still there. I knew it wasn't the most luxurious place, but I wasn't looking for luxury either. I just wanted a place to stretch my legs and rest before heading to my next meeting. But as soon as I walked in, something began to bother me, like an invisible presence, something I couldn't explain. The receptionist stood there behind the counter, her gaze seemingly lost in some distant distance. She handed me the keys without even looking directly at me, as if she'd been doing it for years, almost automatically. But there was something about the way she avoided eye contact, as if she were afraid, or simply didn't want me to know something. I tried not to think about it, convincing myself it was just the accumulated fatigue of a long trip, my mind playing tricks. I just wanted to go into the room, close my eyes for a few hours, and forget the world outside. When she handed me the keys and showed me the way, the only thing that really caught my attention was the fact that the motel seemed completely empty. As I walked through the lobby, with the dim lights and the smell of old carpet in the air, I could feel the solitude of the place. There was no sound of conversation or footsteps from other guests. The silence was thick, almost oppressive, and although the motel was cheap and simple, something about it seemed off, as if it hid more than it seemed. But I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just another motel, I told myself, the kind of place you sleep in and move on. But as I passed through the narrow hallways, something made me pause for a moment, as if a strange sensation had crept into my mind. I tried to ignore it, glanced at the closed room doors, and imagined the city of Kingman as still as the motel. I reached my room, and as simple as it was a relief to enter and close the door. The room was stuffy, with the heavy curtains blocking out all natural light, and the bed, with its white sheets and worn rug, seemed more inviting as I moved away from those strange sensations. But the atmosphere was still permeated with something I couldn't quite identify. I was too tired to worry about it, so I threw myself onto the bed, closed my eyes, and tried to rest. But sleep wouldn't come. The silence outside seemed to envelop me strangely, and even the small noises of the motel's structure, the creaking of wood, the sudden switching off of the air conditioning, created a sense of growing unease. It was when I decided to go to the bathroom that things really started to change. As I entered the bathroom, the steam from a possibly recent shower still lingered on the mirror, and as I looked at it, an uneasy feeling washed over me. But what really made me stop and focus was the note that was lying near the sink, as if someone had left it there in a hurry. "They're watching you. Do not enter room 5. Those words seemed to echo in my head, like a direct warning, something that wasn't there by accident. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But how can anyone ignore such a direct and cryptic message, especially when you already know something strange is happening around you? It was then that the mystery began to unfold before me, and I knew there was no turning back. What was happening there? Why would someone have left that note? Who were they? Questions began to form, and I couldn't just let it all go. I needed to understand what was happening. But before I could head to room 5 and investigate further, a feeling that I wasn't the only one there crept over me. Something told me the motel wasn't as empty as it seemed. It wasn't clear yet, but the clues were piling up. Because when I decided to open the door to room 5 and enter, the reality of everything that was happening shattered. What I found inside that room was so disturbing that it left me with more questions than answers. The fear I felt upon crossing that door was real, and what awaited me inside will make you question even the concept of safety in the most innocuous places. What was happening there behind the motel walls, and who was behind that note? I was about to find out. But in doing so, I was entering a dangerous game, where what seems harmless can be the key to something much darker and deeper. Now stay with me, because what you're about to hear about what happened when I opened the door to room 5 will blow your mind. How the decisions, the details, and the way time and space intermingled there reveal the true story of a simple place, yet shrouded in mystery. The room, as expected, was simple. A bed with white sheets, a stained carpet that looked like it had seen better days, and an old wooden chair beside it. It wasn't the kind of place you'd choose for a vacation, but for a night's rest on a long trip, it was more than adequate. The air was stuffy, and I soon realized the fan wasn't working very well. But even so, fatigue consumed me so much that I knew that in a few minutes, I would be immersed in the silence of sleep. But something was there, like a shadow in the back of my mind, something that made me restless. The receptionist handed me the keys without even looking directly at me. She seemed distant, as if she were somewhere far away, and when she wished me a good night, the look she gave me wasn't that of someone simply following protocol. There was something more, a slight chill, a fear I couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't that she'd done anything wrong, but the atmosphere in the place was heavy, and that look only heightened that feeling. I tried to ignore it, my mind fixed on the rest I so desperately needed. With each step I took toward the room, the air seemed to grow thicker, and a small sense of unease grew within me. I knew I was just tired, but deep down, my intuition was telling me there was something there, something that shouldn't be there. I closed the door behind me, tossed my keys on the bedside table, and went straight to the bathroom. I needed to wash away the weight of the road, feel the coolness of the water. The shower, which should have been a relief, didn't seem to work as it should. The hot water and steam began to fog the mirror, but what disturbed me most was the feeling that someone was there, not someone I could see, but a presence, something in the air, hovering in the room, waiting to be noticed. The mirror fogged up very quickly, as if time had been distorted within that space. I tried to push these thoughts away and focused on my exhaustion. My body was finally beginning to relax, but when I got out of the shower and looked back at the mirror, the fog was still there. It was slowly dissipating, but that wasn't what made me pause for a moment. It was the fact that, as the mirror began to clear, there was writing on it, not in ink or pencil, but in condensation, as if someone had run their fingers across the surface of the mirror, leaving a mark I couldn't explain. I moved closer, and the words slowly began to emerge. "They're watching you. Don't go into room 5. At that moment, my body froze. My brain tried to rationalize it, but there was no logical explanation. It wasn't something someone had written there in minutes. It was as if the message had formed while I was in the shower. It was as if, somewhere in there, something was watching me, waiting for me to see what was happening. My first reaction was denial. I tried to ignore it, thinking it might be some kind of prank from a previous guest. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The feeling of unease was back, now stronger than ever. I looked in the mirror again, trying to comprehend, trying to understand why something so simple could have had such an impact on me. I turned away from the mirror and decided not to think about it anymore. Let it go, I thought to myself. It's just tiredness, just the stress of the trip. But the truth was, I knew I couldn't let it go. Something told me that this message wasn't just a random note, that room 5 wasn't just any room, and that somehow I had been chosen. But by whom? Why me? And what was really happening in that motel, which seemed so simple and without history, but which was now charged with a strange, inexplicable energy? I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every noise in the motel seemed amplified. Every shadow on the wall seemed to move, as if the room itself were alive and watching me. The feeling of being watched only grew, and my mind couldn't rest. Time seemed to drag. I just wanted to sleep, to continue my journey, but something told me that this simple rest wouldn't be the end of the story. Something was about to happen. I knew I had to find out what was going on. If it were just a psychological trick, I could easily ignore it, but something in my gut told me there was more to it. Maybe it was the tension of the moment, but I could no longer see that room as a safe place. And it was at that moment, when my curiosity finally overcame my fear, that I decided to do what I shouldn't. I decided to go to room 5. What I found there not only challenged my perception of reality, but also made me understand that sometimes the answers we seek are closer than we imagine, but that the hidden truth can only be revealed when we decide to face our own fears and questions. If room 5 had something to do with all this, I needed to know. It turned out that by opening that door, I was about to enter a place where the rules of the real world no longer seemed to apply, and where the decisions I made that night would ultimately shape my journey into something completely different from anything I could have imagined. I entered the bathroom, and at first glance, everything seemed normal. The simple design, the smell of old soap in the air, the soft sound of water running from the faucet. Nothing that made me think twice. I had only one desire: to relax, to wash away the tension of the trip, to feel a little more human after hours on the road. But when I looked in the mirror, the first thing I noticed was the steam. It was there, covering the surface of the mirror, as if someone had just stepped out of the shower. The problem, however, was that I was alone. The bathroom door had been closed for hours, and I was the only one to enter. It gave me a chill. It couldn't just be steam. It was as if something or someone had been there just before I entered. Maybe it was fatigue playing tricks on me. Maybe it was exhaustion making me imagine things. But there was something strange about that steam. Something out of place. I walked over to the mirror, trying to wipe away the fog with my hand. And that's when I realized it wasn't just steam. Something else had left that residue on the surface, as if an invisible presence had materialized in the space between me and the glass, as if someone had somehow interacted with me, observing me at that moment. Deep down, a strong feeling began to grow. I wasn't alone there, but what really stopped me, what truly broke the line between mere perception and something truly strange, was the note. It was lying on the floor near the sink, as if someone had left it there quickly, perhaps without intending to be seen. The note was a little crumpled and wet. I didn't think twice about bending down to pick it up, but when I looked at it, the words, though simple, seemed heavy in the air. "They're watching you. Don't go into room 5. The words didn't make sense. How could anyone know about room 5? What did I know about room 5? Nothing. It was just an ordinary number, but I felt like I was connected to something beyond comprehension. I turned away from the note and looked around the rest of the bathroom. The shadows, which had previously seemed normal, seemed to stretch and shape themselves strangely, as if the room were adjusting to the message. On impulse, I ran to the door and looked down the hallway, as if something there might give me answers. The hallway was silent, empty. There was no one in sight, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. It was as if every step I took was calculated, as if I were part of an experiment or something happening without my consent. Fear began to take hold, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I went back to my room and closed the door. I stood there, silent, trying to gather my thoughts, but the note wouldn't leave my mind. It was as if he'd marked me, as if I'd touched something I shouldn't have. The motel, that seemingly harmless place, was becoming something much more complex. Room 5. Why did it keep coming back to me? Why? Was that simple combination of numbers haunting me? Had someone left the note there on purpose? And if so, what would happen if I entered room 5? Something told me that when I opened that door, it wouldn't be just another night's rest in a motel. I was about to enter a territory where the rules were different, where the line between normal and paranormal was blurring. The feeling of being watched only grew. I'd tried to ignore it all, but now it seemed impossible. The room, which until then had, seemed like the only safe place, began to feel like a prison. I was trapped inside a game, where the only option was to move forward. Now, I wanted to understand what was happening. Why me? Why that note? It was more than just coincidence. There was something bigger going on here, and I was getting closer and closer to discovering the truth. Something was calling me, pushing me toward what I didn't understand, and every step I took seemed to bring me closer to a revelation that could change everything. I knew that when I entered room 5, everything would change. It wasn't just the number that bothered me, but what it represented. A riddle, a door I knew I should open, but at the same time, it made me hesitate. The fear was there, but curiosity, that uncontrollable force, pulled me through that door, into the mystery unfolding around me. What I found in room 5 wasn't just a shock. It was a revelation of something far beyond what I'd imagined. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in a way I couldn't control, and what had seemed like a simple motel was revealing itself to be the center of something much larger, something I was somehow predestined to discover. The answers lay in room 5, and as I opened that door, I was finally about to face something my mind wasn't ready to comprehend. What really happened there? What awaited me inside that room? The journey I began that night was irreversible, and the choices I made now would lead me to a place where I would discover the hidden truth, the final revelation. If you're wondering what I found, know that the impact of everything that happened in that room will shake you in unexpected ways. It wasn't just the place that was out of control, but the very rules of reality were beginning to unravel. My heart raced. I was trying to rationalize everything that was happening, but no matter how hard I tried to shake off the growing feeling that something was wrong, it only grew. The note, the strange vapor in the mirror, and that feeling of being watched, it all kept bringing me back to the same place, room 5. I didn't know what to think, but something told me this wasn't just some guest's prank. The pieces were starting to fit together, and each piece of the puzzle was pushing me toward the unknown. Without a second thought, I left the room and went to reception. The receptionist, still with a distant look in her eyes, didn't seem at all comfortable seeing me again. I asked with forced calm about room 5, expecting a logical explanation, but her answer was yet another attempt to divert me from the truth. She broke out in a cold sweat, visibly uncomfortable. Her forced smile didn't go unnoticed. I could tell she was trying to hide something. But what? Why did room 5 seem to be the center of all this strangeness? Nothing much, just an old room. Don't worry, she said, barely looking me in the eye. But there was something in her words that made me even more skeptical. What do you mean, just an old room? What was so simple about that room that made her react that way? It wasn't just an old room. I could sense in every word she said that there was something more, something much deeper going on there, something she didn't want me to know. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this story, and it wouldn't be easy, but somewhere deep inside, I already knew there was no going back. I couldn't let it go. Something inside me wouldn't let me ignore it, as if an invisible force was pushing me toward that room. That look in the receptionist's eyes, the way she tried to avoid my question, it all told me she knew more than she was revealing, like someone with a dark secret who preferred to hide the truth at all costs. But what I didn't know at that moment was that, in searching for answers, I was about to unearth something that should have remained buried. I decided to investigate further. I left the reception and walked back down the hallway, unsure of what I was looking for. Each step I took made the room feel heavier, as if the walls around me were beginning to close in. The empty hallway, the closed doors, the flickering lights, it all felt like a nightmare scenario that wouldn't let me go. The note was still on my mind. They were watching me, and I was certain that room 5 held the key to the mystery, though I didn't yet know what to find there. The shadows in the hallway, the marks on the walls, everything seemed to move strangely. I knew I wasn't seeing things as they really were, or maybe I was, and the truth was more disturbing than I could have imagined. My fear was growing, but my curiosity was even stronger. I needed to know what was happening, what the receptionist knew, what the motel was hiding. I needed to understand why room 5 was being treated with such secrecy. As I approached the door to room 5, a feeling of claustrophobia began to take hold. It was as if the space around me was tighter, more oppressive. Something was there. I could feel it, as if the very air was charged with something I couldn't identify. My fingers touched the doorknob, and for a moment, I hesitated. What was I about to do? Opening that door meant going beyond what I was prepared to handle. But at the same time, a greater force seemed to be calling me inside. I didn't know what awaited me there, but I knew it was something I could no longer ignore. As the door slowly opened, a wave of cold enveloped me. The room was empty, but there was something strange about the atmosphere. The walls, the furniture, even the smell of dust in the air. Everything felt uncomfortable, as if it had been frozen in time. I looked around trying to make sense of it all, but the answers were eluding me. I didn't understand. I couldn't. The seemingly ordinary room 5 was beginning to reveal a puzzle that defied logic. But most disconcerting of all was the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something or someone was there, just waiting to be found. And it was when I looked at the bed that I finally understood what was happening. It wasn't just an empty room. Something was moving there, something my mind couldn't quite grasp. I knew the motel, that simple place on the road, was more connected to the past than I could have imagined. And as I stared at that space, I felt I was closer to a revelation that would change everything I knew about that place, about my own journey, and about what lurks in the shadows of Route 66. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what I found in that room not only challenged my view of what was real, but also of what was happening right under our eyes, hidden in plain sight. What I was about to discover wasn't just a horror story, but a revelation of something that had somehow always been there, waiting to be found. And as the truth began to unfold, I knew its impact would change the way I saw everything around me. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. If you also feel like the pieces of the puzzle are starting to fit together in a way you never imagined before, sleep simply wouldn't come. It was as if something was keeping me from resting, something invisible but powerful. The bed, which had previously seemed like a comfortable refuge, now felt strange and uncomfortable. The feeling that I wasn't alone, that the very space around me was charged with something different, was intensifying. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't avoid it anymore. Something was happening, and whatever it was calling me to room 5. I knew I should resist, but curiosity was getting the better of me. The feeling that I needed to understand what was behind those doors consumed me. It was a strange sensation, as if, when I turned my back, something I didn't understand would remain there, watching me, waiting. It wasn't just doubt, it was desire, the need to know that drove me. I already knew I couldn't sleep until I discovered what was there, until I understood what room 5 had to do with everything that was happening. It wasn't just the note or the receptionist's uncomfortable look, but an invisible force guiding me toward it. I got out of bed, the sound of my feet hitting the floor louder than it should have been, more deafening. The hallway was quiet, which wasn't surprising. I'd expected it. The dense silence of the motel seemed to envelop everything, making the atmosphere even more charged. As I walked through the door to my room, a shiver ran down my spine. Something told me not to go on, to turn around and go back. I knew something was wrong, but at the same time, I couldn't resist. I arrived at the door to room 5, and the first thing I noticed was that it was ajar. That door should never be open, especially after everything I'd already seen, especially after everything I already knew. Yet there it was, slightly ajar, as if waiting for me. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to go back to my room, where I was safe, but an inexplicable force kept pulling me forward. Something told me there was no turning back, that the answers were here, and I had to find them, no matter the cost. I put my hand on the doorknob, and the door opened with a soft creak. What I saw inside made no sense, or rather, it shouldn't have. The room was dark, but there was a faint, barely perceptible light coming from a window with the curtains drawn. The bed was untouched, the sheets still perfectly straight, as if no one had slept there. The silence was almost too heavy, as if the air around me were compressed. But what really stopped me was the smell. It wasn't the normal smell of a motel room. It was metallic, stuffy, a mixture of dust and something else, unpleasant, something I couldn't quite place. I entered the room, and as I did, a chill ran through me. The air felt colder in there, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped. My steps, once confident, were now hesitant. I looked around, trying to find any clue, any sign that I was just exaggerating, that this was all just a figment of my imagination. But there was nothing. The room was empty, except for the simple furniture and the strange smell. I was alone, but I didn't feel it. I could sense a presence, as if I were being watched, as if the very space around me was aware of my arrival. It was then that I looked in the mirror, and in that moment, the feeling of discomfort intensified. The mirror was fogged, as if someone had just looked at themselves in it. But the most disturbing thing wasn't that it was fogged. It was that, when I looked back at it, mist formed before my eyes. And not only that, something seemed to move there, as if a figure were beginning to appear in the reflection, even though I knew there was no one behind me. My heart raced. I tried to blink my eyes, as if to dispel the vision, but for a brief moment, the reflection seemed to distort, as if trying to communicate with me. It was at that moment that fear took over. I was about to leave the room, but something held me back. The same invisible force that had brought me there now prevented me from leaving. I wanted to run, but at the same time, I felt that if I left now, I would miss the chance to understand what was happening, the chance to discover what Room 5 was trying to reveal to me, and that somehow was scarier than anything I had seen so far. I turned away from the mirror and began to look around again, as if trying to understand what was happening there. What was that? Smell? What was that feeling? Why did Room 5 seem to have something so strange, so deep, hidden within it? I knew the answer was there, in those walls, in the shadows, somewhere I hadn't yet discovered, and without meaning to, I started walking toward the window. When I lifted the curtain, what I saw outside, a staggering distance away, stopped me in my tracks. There was something on the horizon, something I couldn't understand, something that shouldn't be there, something that, if true, would change everything I knew about that road, that motel, and even about myself. What I found looking out the window wasn't a simple illusion. It was something much bigger, something lurking in the shadows that night, waiting to be discovered, something that somehow connected to all the other mysteries unfolding around me. The answer was closer than I imagined, but also more twisted than I could have ever believed. And in taking that final step, I was about to discover something that would change my journey forever. I entered cautiously, the door creaking slightly as I pushed, as if trying to alert me to what was to come. My heart pounded in my chest, but an invisible force pushed me inside. The room was completely silent, and the musty smell from the hallway didn't seem as strong here. I closed the door behind me, turning to take in the room. Everything was perfect. The sheets were neatly pulled over the bed, the curtains were drawn, and the soft, dim lighting came from a lamp in the corner. There was nothing particularly strange about the room, but that only made it more unsettling. The fact that it felt so normal, so empty, made me even more tense. Something was wrong there, and I knew I was about to find out what it was. My instincts told me to leave, to get out of that place, but my mind was consumed with the need to know, to understand what was happening. When I looked at the bed, a chill ran down my spine. There lay the figure, lying there. It looked like a person, but it was so still, it seemed more like a statue than a human being. The person was covered with a sheet up to their head, their body almost completely hidden, but something about their posture, the way they lay, left me with the feeling that this wasn't normal. Something was wrong. I approached slowly, my heart pounding. Every step I took seemed to be absorbed by the silence of the room, and even the sound of my breathing seemed louder than it should have been. I moved closer to the bed, observing the figure. It was a woman, judging by the shape of her body. Her hair was spread out on the pillow with a soft sheen, but there was something strange about it. I leaned in closer to see her face, but as I did, a shiver ran across my skin. What was happening? Why was that person standing there so still? Suddenly, the figure moved. It wasn't a physical movement, but more like a shift in the space around her. The woman vanished before my eyes, not in the conventional way, but as if erased from existence. I blinked, trying to understand what was happening, but when I looked again, the sheet was empty, and the bed was perfectly made, as if no one had been there. I froze, unable to react for a few seconds. What had I seen? I knew I wasn't imagining things. It wasn't a hallucination. I saw the woman. I saw the movement. She was there, but now she wasn't. I took a step back, my mind trying to process what had just happened. It was impossible. I couldn't possibly be seeing things. This couldn't possibly be happening. I looked around, searching for any sign that someone was playing a trick on me, but the room was empty. The silence that filled the room became deafening. Fear grew within me, but what confused me most was the certainty that this wasn't a simple illusion. Something was very wrong here. I began searching for clues, anything that would give me a logical explanation for what I had just witnessed. I looked at the floor, the walls, the curtains, but nothing seemed to indicate that something supernatural was occurring there. There were no marks, no traces that anything had happened, but I knew for sure that what I saw was real, and even more, something told me that I hadn't seen it all yet. I decided to look around, scanning the room from top to bottom, to see if I could find any clues that would help me understand what was happening. My eyes fixed on the nightstand next to the bed, and that's when I found something else. A photo, half blurred, half faded, sat there on the table, its edges frayed. I picked it up with trembling hands, and when I looked at it, I saw an image of a couple. They were smiling, but their faces seemed distorted, as if the photo had been taken from a very long time ago, yet still visible. The woman in the photo was the same one I'd seen in the bed. I felt my stomach tighten. How had that photo gotten there? What was going on? What was happening in that motel? Why did the woman in the photo seem so real, so alive, while the room was empty? I looked back at the sheet on the bed, now perfectly taut, and the mystery only deepened. I wanted to understand. I needed to understand. The pieces were there, but they didn't fit together logically. I was beginning to lose myself in the possibilities, the fears, in what could be real and what could just be a game of my mind. The room was challenging me, forcing me to question everything around me. With each new step I took, more questions arose, more enigmas appeared, and the answers became increasingly distorted. I knew the motel was hiding something, and the truth I sought lay not just in that room, but in the very essence of what that place represented. Room 5 was just the beginning of something much larger, something that defied reality itself. The answer was there, but I still didn't know how far I was willing to go to find it. When I left Room 5, the feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. Those images, the figure disappearing before my eyes and the old photo I'd found, all of it still consumed me. With every step I took to leave that place, something inside me told me I shouldn't leave without knowing more. Curiosity, which until that moment had seemed like just a gentle impulse, now took hold of me with immeasurable force. I needed answers. I went to the town bar, an old building with the smell of wood and tobacco permeating the walls. The place was almost empty, except for a man sitting in the back, wiping a glass with a dirty cloth. The bartender looked at me as soon as I entered, and upon seeing my face, his expression changed. He was nervous. I knew there was something he wasn't telling me. So, without further ado, I decided to ask about the motel, about Room 5, and what really happened there. His answer made my heart beat faster than anything I had experienced up until that moment. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question, and before answering, he glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. When he spoke, his voice was low, as if sharing a very old and dark secret. He said the motel had a much deeper history than I'd imagined, and that room 5 wasn't just any number. In fact, room 5 had been the scene of several unexplained disappearances since the 1970s, and over the years this room had become the focus of every local police investigation. He told me that in the 1970s, a series of tourists and drivers had mysteriously disappeared, and all of them, without exception, had stayed in that room. Authorities tried repeatedly to understand what was happening, but always failed to find concrete answers. Some said the motel had a dark past, something related to ancient cult practices, but no one could prove anything. The bartender told me, his voice trembling, that there were rumors that room 5 itself was cursed, and that those people were never seen again after entering that room. Some believe room 5 was designed to lure victims. Some say it pulls people into it as if there's no escape, he told me, his gaze deep and distant, as if he'd heard this story many times before. I stared at him, processing his words. The story was so bizarre, so unusual, that it seemed more like a fairy tale than a fact, but at the same time, I felt like it was connecting pieces that had been loose until that moment. Room 5 somehow seemed to be the epicenter of something much larger, something beyond my comprehension. And what frightened me most was the fact that the bartender, who clearly knew something more, was so nervous talking about it. He told me that the authorities had tried to close the motel several times, but there was always something, some inexplicable reason, that stopped them. As if there were an invisible force, something supernatural keeping the place intact, functioning as a kind of trap. The bartender, visibly shaken, told me that from time to time, new guests would disappear there, especially those who tried to investigate further into the motel. Some travelers disappeared, others were simply never seen leaving the room. He told me, in a barely audible voice, that he believed the motel, and especially room 5, was a kind of doorway to something far beyond the physical world. I didn't know what to think, but what he said next sent a chill down my spine. You weren't the first to have a strange encounter in that room, and you won't be the last. But I don't advise going back there. That place is dangerous, if you know what I mean. He said these words to me as if he were giving me a final warning, but at the same time, he seemed to want me to leave as quickly as possible. The fear in his eyes was palpable. He knew something I didn't, something he wasn't willing to share completely, something that was making me increasingly uneasy, as if, listening to his words, I was beginning to realize I was part of a story much bigger than any simple mystery I could have imagined. That motel wasn't just a transit point, but a part of something deeply rooted in the city, and perhaps even further, in something that crossed the line between the real and the inexplicable. Because what the bartender told me made me question everything I knew about that motel and Route 66. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the truth I was seeking seemed more twisted than I could have imagined. What was happening there in the heart of Kingman wasn't just a series of disappearances. There was something more, something lurking in the shadows of the motel, something waiting to be discovered. I was beginning to realize that my journey was no longer just about understanding a common mystery, but about confronting something that challenged the very perception of reality. I was in shock. Every word the bartender said to me felt like another piece of a puzzle that, until that moment, I hadn't even realized I was putting together. The motel, for all its simple and harmless appearance, was far from being just a resting place. And now, the story he'd told me, more than just strange, was becoming an inescapable truth. What disturbed me most wasn't the fact that other travelers had similar accounts, but the way the motel's story was intertwining with my own journey. I wasn't the first to experience this sensation, and by all indications, I wouldn't be the last. The feeling of being watched, the strange sounds, and the disappearing figures, all of it seemed part of a narrative I couldn't yet fully comprehend. And with each word the bartender spoke, the weight of this revelation grew harder to ignore. He told me that many travelers who had stayed there had reported similar phenomena, unexplained sounds, figures that disappeared as if they had never existed, and most disturbing of all, the constant feeling that someone was always watching, even when the motel was empty. Those who had experiences like mine were, somehow, pulled into something greater, something that was hidden beneath the surface of that motel, as if this place were a convergence point for something much deeper than a simple horror story. But what disturbed me even more was what he said next. The bartender, his voice lower than before, told me about an old story, something not recorded in the newspapers, something few knew about. He told me that anyone who somehow awakened the mystery of the motel, as I apparently had, was never able to leave town. It was as if something was happening there, something inexplicable, something that, if you discovered it, you wouldn't be able to return to your normal life. They were somehow trapped in the mystery of that place. Some people, he said, were found days later, but they were completely different, lost, as if they had been touched by something that transformed them beyond recognition. This story messed with my head in a way I couldn't control. What do you mean, not being able to leave the city? I was trying to make sense of it all, and the pieces seemed to be falling away from me more and more. The bartender said local authorities had tried to investigate, but never got to the bottom of it. Some of the disappearances, he said, were never solved, and the families who searched for answers ended up becoming part of something much bigger, something that transcends what we consider normal. I was beginning to realize that everything that was happening wasn't just an isolated event. The motel wasn't a simple transit point. It was a place with a much deeper history, a place with an invisible power that drew people into its mystery and made them disappear. What disturbed me most, however, was the fact that, deep down, I knew I was already somehow involved in this story. This wasn't just another night in a cheap motel, but a point of transformation, of revelation. I was about to lose myself in what seemed like a maze with no exit. What was happening there was far greater than I had ever imagined. The bartender seemed to sense my growing unease. He looked at me seriously and, said, "You don't understand. The motel is more than just a place. It's a meeting point between what you know and what you can't understand. And those who enter, one way or another, end up becoming part of it." His words echoed in my mind, but at the same time, a part of me still doubted. I wanted to deny it, wanted to believe it was all just a legend, a frightened traveler's tale. But deep down, I knew something very real was happening. The mystery was closing in around me, and with each answer I sought, more doors opened to something bigger, more disturbing. Room 5, the note, the figure disappearing before my eyes. Everything was connected. What had seemed like a random sequence of events now revealed itself as a riddle, a hidden truth about to reveal itself in ways I couldn't control. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the stories the bartender told me aren't just about a haunted motel or unexplained phenomena. They're about what happens when reality begins to disintegrate, when people begin to realize that what they know about the world may be nothing more than an illusion. The motel wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a door, a passage to something I didn't yet fully understand. The answers I was seeking were all there, but upon finding them, I knew my life would never be the same. I was delving deeper and deeper into the unknown, and the line between what was real and what wasn't was becoming increasingly blurred. Comment below. This makes sense to me. If you also think this journey is starting to reveal something much bigger than just a haunted motel. The next morning everything seemed normal, even though I could no longer look at the motel the same way. The sun, weak and hesitant, filtered through the curtains as I packed my things, trying somehow to get back to my routine, to move on as if nothing had happened. But in truth, I knew everything had changed. The weight on my chest, the feeling that something was at stake, wouldn't leave me alone. The mystery was more vivid than ever, and room 5, that immortal enigma, still lingered in my mind. I was ready to leave this place and move on, but it seemed the motel wasn't willing to let me go so easily. That's when the phone rang. The sound of it ringing was like a crack in the air, breaking the morning silence. I glanced at the number on the screen. It was unfamiliar. What made me hesitate even more was the feeling that the number had appeared as a sign. Something was about to be revealed, and I knew my story with that motel wasn't over yet. I took a deep breath and answered, trying to control the uneasiness building in my stomach. On the other end of the line, the voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something in the way she said it that made me freeze. "They know you're leaving, but be careful. You might not actually leave." The words slid across the air like a cold blade cutting through the air. I didn't know who was speaking, but somehow the voice sounded familiar, as if I'd heard something similar before. Fear gripped me, and my heart raced. Every cell in my body urged me to hang up and move on. But at the same time, I knew this call wasn't just an empty threat. It was more of a warning that the game wasn't over, and that something was moving. something watching me, controlling me, forcing me to participate in a game much bigger than I could imagine. I tried to answer, but the line was dead. No other words, just silence. That silence that made the weight of those words echo within me, like a distant echo, growing stronger by the second. Fear spread through my body, but I couldn't stay any longer. The motel, room 5, the note, it was all consuming me in a way I didn't know how to handle. The feeling of being watched was almost unbearable, but I needed to get out of there before the fear took over completely. I dressed quickly, grabbing my things, and with each movement, the weight of those words seemed to grow more real. I was leaving the motel, but the motel didn't seem willing to let me go so easily. What was behind that call? What was they? I knew I was on dangerous ground, and by taking that step, by following my instincts and leaving the motel, I was leaving behind something I might not be able to grasp so easily. The city seemed quieter than ever. The wind blew through the deserted streets, and I felt as if I were being watched with every step I took. I glanced back at the motel, which was shrinking in the rearview mirror, but I knew that somehow it would never truly be gone. Whatever lay there, whatever was connected to room 5, ran far deeper than any simple mystery I could solve. This wasn't just a haunted hotel, it was a presence, something that transcended the physical and connected to something darker. I accelerated the car, trying to keep going, trying to continue my journey, but with every mile the weight grew heavier. I didn't know if I was running away from something, or if I was moving away from a greater truth, a truth I wasn't ready to discover. But either way, something told me that from now on, my life would never be the same, because the connection between what happened that night and what lay behind those mysterious words goes beyond anything I could have imagined. The impact of those words, and the hidden truth about the motel, were only just beginning to unfold, and as I continued my journey, I realized I was getting closer and closer to something that, if uncovered, would transform my reality in ways I couldn't even foresee. To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. The memories are still fresh in my mind, but the feeling that something was being hidden, something that wasn't meant to be seen, never faded. I left the motel, but something inside me still hasn't shaken off that place. That strange energy that enveloped me. Something tells me I'm still being watched, as if the presence I felt in the shadows of room 5 is following me, like a shadow that can't be erased, no matter how hard I try to move away. The note in the bathroom, the mysterious words, "They're watching you. Don't go into room 5. I couldn't ignore it any longer, and something inside me knew that somehow this story wasn't over yet. The fear I felt that night, the feeling of being watched, became a question that could never be answered with simple answers. The motel, room 5, everything that happened there made no sense to reason. I tried to rationalize, to seek logical explanations, but I knew deep down that the truth was beyond my comprehension. The people, the travelers who had passed through the same place, those who were disappearing or becoming shadows of their former selves, it all seemed to fit together in a disturbing way. No matter how hard I tried to return to normality, to routine, something inside me was broken, and the motel was still on my mind, like an open wound. I looked at the roads, past other motels, and everything seemed to morph into the same thing, a feeling that at any moment I could be back in that dark hallway, at that half-open door, looking at room 5. The idea that there might be something else hidden inside me, something that kept me coming back to that place, tormented me. It was as if I had been marked, chosen to be part of that mystery, somehow, even though I was physically far away. I didn't know if it was too late to turn back, or if in fact I'd already been part of this story from the moment I set foot in that motel. The truth, or perhaps what seemed to be the truth, was slipping further and further away from my grasp. Time seemed to no longer matter. What happened there couldn't be resolved simply by leaving, by the decision to leave. I knew I was involved in something much bigger than I'd imagined. Room 5, the note, the feeling of being watched, all of it formed a much deeper enigma, something that extended beyond a simple roadside motel. And it was with these thoughts that I realized that perhaps it was impossible to go back. I had already crossed an invisible line, a line that, once crossed, prevents us from looking back and seeing the world with the same eyes. I knew that, from that moment on, my perception of motels, of seemingly ordinary and harmless places, would never be the same again. I would view these places with the same sense that there was something behind the facade, something waiting to be discovered, something that many could never understand until, inevitably, they were drawn into that mystery. What happened in that motel, what that room represented, connects to a hidden truth that extends through places like that. What do the travelers, the missing figures, and the motels themselves really hide? How does the very nature of some places seem to absorb people, making them part of something we can't see, but that is somehow always there, watching, waiting? What really happens when someone gets too involved in a mystery that isn't meant to be solved? Each discovery I've made so far has brought me closer to a revelation that challenged my understanding of reality, and I knew the answer, or perhaps the answers, were closer than I imagined. What began as simple curiosity turned into a transformative journey, a quest to understand the invisible connections between events, choices, and places. The impact of those nights in the motel, and the feeling that I was touched by something greater, remains with me, like a mark I can't erase. What do you think? Does the motel really hide a dark secret? What would you do if you were in my shoes, facing everything I went through? Personally, I'm still trying to understand what happened there. Every step I took, every piece I put together, led me deeper into a reality that is anything but simple. The motel, with its worn facade and quiet hallways, seemed harmless, but the truth behind it left me completely disconcerted. Was it all a coincidence, or did the motel itself somehow have something more to reveal? I found myself wondering how things might have been different if I'd made a different decision, if I'd ignored the feeling that something was wrong, if I'd simply left the motel behind without questioning anything else. But deep down, I know that curiosity always wins. It's that irresistible urge to discover what's behind closed doors, what's hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on all this. After all, we all have different perceptions of the places we visit, the stories we hear, and what truly lurks behind the places that seem normal to us. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you were faced with a situation like this? Would you walk away, or, like me, would you become obsessed with uncovering the truth? The story of the motel, room 5, and everything that happened that night isn't over yet. I feel like there are layers yet to be uncovered, and the hidden truth, as always, is getting further away with every attempt to reach it. If you're as involved as I am and want to follow me on this journey, you know what to do. Comment below and share your thoughts. The mystery doesn't end here, and I'm sure that as we explore further, more revelations will emerge. And so, you've made it to the end. If you're here, following along until the very last second, then this journey has something in common for both of us. An immense curiosity about what else lies hidden behind these mysterious and terrifying stories. If all this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I'm with you until the end. I'd love to know you're on this journey too. If you liked what you saw, please leave a like on the video. It really helps keep the channel alive and well, sharing more stories like this. And of course, if you want to continue following this series of spooky tales, subscribe. With each new video, we'll delve deeper into this world of mystery, revealing motel secrets you never imagined. And don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss a thing, because the story doesn't end here. Now, if you're curious to find out what else lies behind the doors of the scariest motels, I invite you to check out the next video, with even more bizarre and disturbing stories. Let's join us on this journey, and who knows, uncover more dark secrets the world tries to hide. See you soon.